Hi everybody, and just me let me yeah. Today is Wednesday, September 24th, 2025, and our friend Laith Marouf is here with us. Welcome, Laith.
Good to be with you, Nima.
Laith, let me start with the please subscribe and hit the like button before we start. And right on below Laith name, you see on the picture, you see Free Palestine video. You can support Laith and what he's doing on the field, on the ground in Lebanon, in southern part of Lebanon. And he prepares other reports from other parts, from specifically from. Do you have someone in Syria? And
We had somebody, we had a team in Syria, but since the fall of the government there, it's pretty dangerous for them. But we report from Palestine, and I travel, and Hadi also travels to Iran and Iraq, and we're covering as much as we can.
so you're so much connected with the axis of resistance, and you know what's going on there. Leith, how do you find the situation with the case of the Palestinian state? We've seen that France, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, they came out and talked about the Palestinian state. And today we've learned from Politico, there is an article in Politico says that Donald Trump promised the Arab states, the leader of Arab states, he's not going to let Netanyahu to capture the West Bank. How do you see this situation right now with what has happened so far?
Well, it's clear that this move by all these Western countries to recognize a disarmed Palestinian state that has no control of its airspace is really about controlling the public pressure that is building up in the streets, and that they're worried about rebellion really happening. Now that there's such a huge gap between the public opinion and the fact that there is almost no representation for this public opinion allowed in the parliaments of the UK or Canada or what have you. So I think it's a pressure release mechanism. Also, Trump's promise is, it's not written. It's supposed to have been said in closed rooms. So again, this is another one of those attempts to release pressure. What's happening in the West Bank is the Zionists have shut down the border crossings between Jordan and the West Bank, and have set up over the last 3 days checkpoints and gates outside every Palestinian city, town, and village in the West Bank, and they're under siege. People are cut off for more than 3 days now. That students that went to school can't go back home. People that went to work, and there is now, a lot of goodwill. People coming out to the checkpoints to feed and give water to the people that are stuck, and or offering them housing. This is the reality of what's happening in the West Bank when Trump talks like this. And I would say the symbolic admittance of Palestine as a state is not coupled at the same time with, let's say, British embassy opened in East Jerusalem to Palestine, or a Canadian embassy. There's no real diplomatic exchange. And I would add that this half measure is going to cause a lot of trouble for these states, because it was a desperate measure also. They didn't calculate the full extent of what does this mean, acknowledging Palestine as a state. If Palestine is a state and it's at peace with Canada, and Canada acknowledges it as a state, and there is Canadian citizens that are inside Israel attacking this state of Palestine, then those Canadian or British citizens are in violation of the Foreign Recruitment Act and are liable not under the War Crimes Act, but actual criminal code of Canada, the UK, and Australia, to be jailed for attacking a country that is at peace with the UK, Australia, or Canada. For instance, these are uncalculated, reactions or results of this symbolic, acceptance of Palestine as a state. Another thing that could be a ramification of this is that if Canada, acknowledges Palestine as a state, then Palestinians are citizens of a real state. They're not just refugees that are stateless and can take Canadian companies and Canadian officials in Canadian courts to be charged for participating in a war crime. You see, this before that there was this barrier where Palestinians were considered stateless and they couldn't follow up on these things in courts in the West. So there's uh, reactions and results of this that will be positive, but the intention of all of these states was never these outcomes.
What's so strange, Laith, about these countries that none of them is somehow considering Hamas as a legitimate entity in Palestine? So who's going to be in that position? I don't see PLO being in that position, and nobody recognizes this entity, this institution called PLO, as the representative. And so, what is going on? What do they have a real image of what's going on there? And is what they're talking about based on realistic sort of views of the reality of Palestine?
Yeah, there was surveys done of the Palestinian population just over the last few days as this acknowledgement of Palestine was coming, and as it was coupled with this idea that Hamas cannot govern and that the Palestinian state has to be disarmed and doesn't have control of its airspace. And the results of these surveys showed that a Hamas candidate will win over 72% of the vote, both in the West Bank and Gaza, if they are faced by Mahmoud Abbas. The only person that could win against Hamas is Barghouti, who is in jail, who's been tortured, who people don't know even how his mental capabilities are under this torture for 2 decades in the dungeons. But he would win with a very small, slim majority,
Margin.
54%. So clearly, the West has no say in what Palestinians would like to vote for, and this is all again imaginary because Palestine is occupied and Palestine is living a genocide, both in Gaza and the West Bank, ethnic cleansing that is on a smaller scale or slower scale. And these countries right now that have acknowledged the existence of Palestine as a state have yet to stop their military aid to the Zionist colony and or call for stopping the war on a state they acknowledge exists now, Palestine. Whether they want to say it's Mahmoud Abbas that runs this Palestine or not, it doesn't matter. It's a state that they're at peace with, and they have yet to stop the supply of weapons to destroy it.
After all, if they assume that they want a Palestinian state, there has to be some sort of security and defense, part of the society. How they're going to defend themselves, by the way? Who's going to do that? Is there, other than Hamas, do you know any other force in Palestine to do that?
Obviously, most of the Palestinian political parties are all on the side of Hamas resisting. So we have a national consensus on resistance. And the only party that is not involved in this resistance is Fatah, but only its political wing. Even as the military wing of Fatah, specifically in Gaza and or in places like Jenin and Tul Karim in the West Bank, have broken connection with Mahmoud Abbas and the political wing of Fatah. So, the Palestinians will defend themselves. And now, we always, international law guaranteed their right as an occupied people to defend themselves. Now, with the vast majority of Western states also acknowledging the existence of Palestine as a state, that right to resist is doubled. It's not anymore only that individual Palestinians can decide to resist under international law, but also as a whole people and as a state. And the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, just to be very clear for everybody, is an umbrella organization. One party in it is called Fatah. The PLO, still under the UN recognition, is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO has all the Palestinian factions in it except for Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and that is because Mahmoud Abbas has been refusing to allow the PLO, governing council to meet for more than a decade, where all the other parties have been saying, let Hamas and Islamic Jihad inside the PLO because it's supposed to be the umbrella group to represent all the Palestinians and have always been the only thing that is acknowledged. So yes, there's also another, this is why it's very important to understand. Up until now, the United Nations have not acknowledged the existence of a Palestinian state because there's an American veto. So Palestine cannot be a member of the United Nations. But also, truly, the United States and all of the United Nations voted and accepted the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, as the sole representative of the Palestinian people. So we're in this limbo, right, where the PLO is the sole representative, the Palestinian state exists only in name, and the PLO hasn't met in more than a decade and is not allowed to meet by Abbas, and therefore it doesn't really represent the whole spectrum of Palestinians.
When was the last time they have voted for PLO in the Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza? Was there anything of that sort, voting for them, and or they're deciding about they're going to be the, I don't know, the authority. They want to manage the things. How is that going to work?
Yes. So this is where, again, the issue of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian state becomes problematic, because the Palestinian Authority represents only the Palestinians inside the West Bank and Gaza, not Jerusalem, not inside 1948, and not the vast majority of Palestinians who are in the diaspora or refugee camps outside historic Palestine. So the last election held in 2006 of the Palestinian Authority represented only 25% of the Palestinians as a whole. Okay? And even in that 25%, Hamas won, and it wasn't acknowledged by the West, and Mahmoud Abbas refused it, and so forth. The Palestinian Liberation Organization represents all the Palestinians everywhere, inside historical Palestine, outside historical Palestine. And it's done as a council with the representation of all the parties, and it governs through consensus. And it hasn't, Mahmoud Abbas basically removed much of the leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization from their positions and has refused to allow it to function. Now, we have this acknowledgement of a Palestinian state. Who is a citizen of this state? Am I, as a Palestinian born outside Palestine to refugee family, am I a Palestinian citizen? Do I have a right to vote? Those are all questions that are not answered in whatever acknowledgement we have here. And I tell you, if that survey that was done where we saw Hamas winning 75%, 72% of the vote, if that survey was expanded to include all the Palestinians in the world, Hamas will probably maybe have a bigger even percentage, and the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, will have a higher percentage of support than even Fatah and Mahmoud Abbas, because there's, of course, huge swaths of the Palestinians that live in Latin America and North America and Europe that are actually supporting of the PFLP and its socialist perspective than the liberal agenda of Mahmoud Abbas.
Laith, looking at the history of Hamas since its creation, how do you see the change happening within Hamas? How how can we understand the movement since its creation up until now? What was the changes during the years?
Yeah, I think it started uh, as a kind of a filling a gap when, on the one hand, the defeat of the PFLP and the socialist communist stream of resistance in 1970, September 1970, with the slaughter of the PFLP in Jordan. And then that was followed with the defeat of the liberal Fatah in 1982 in Beirut, and the rise at that point of the Islamic resistance in Lebanon, and of course, just before it, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, that were responses to the failure of everything else, right? And so we had a lot of members of the PLO and Fatah specifically, joining Hezbollah, joining in Lebanon here and working with them. And you had, of course, that multiple defeats that Israel suffered in Lebanon before even their withdrawal to the border, the southern border buffer zone that they created. By that point, it was clear that having a religious outlook is a way to, one of the only ways right now left to drive people into fighting, having a will to sacrifice after the defeats of the liberal and the socialist perspectives. So 1987, with the Second Intifada and Fatah being also away from historical Palestine, and the First Intifada starting in the West Bank and Gaza, with the PLO in diaspora, not even close to the border, neither in Jordan or in Yemen, or Lebanon, but all the way to Tunis, that birthed movements like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Today, we look at this long path of 30 somewhat years. Hamas and Islamic Jihad have matured very much. Their language is able to reach anyone with in the Palestinian struggle, whether they are religious or not. They have a history of sacrifice and delivering on this struggle, and they're not anymore just a fringe group or just a replacement for a failed project. They are a project by themselves, and I think they have managed to win the hearts of the majority of the Palestinians.
Laith, how do you see the communication between Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis? And how similar are their visions? Are there somehow the way that they see the situation in the Middle East? Are they seeing the situation similarly? Do they feel the same way, or there is some sort of differences among them?
We look at the fact that it was Hezbollah and Ansarullah in Yemen that came to the aid of the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, with the Hamas being the largest part. It's clear that Hamas coordinates with the Islamic resistance in Lebanon and in Yemen and in Iran. And if there was any divergence in opinions or paths, maybe 15 years ago, in the beginnings of the war in Syria, where Hamas still hadn't understood that the Muslim Brotherhood wave that Qatar and Turkey were mobilizing against in the Arabic world during the quote-unquote Arabic Spring. At that point, Hamas didn't understand yet that this wave is actually an imperialist color revolution, and that the majority of the Muslim Brotherhood network has been captured by the imperialists. And so we saw that divergence of opinion in the beginning of the war in Syria, and we saw how Hamas changed its position as time passed and as things became much clearer, and the whole propaganda started to collapse of the Arab Spring and so forth. So today, I think Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansarullah, their foreign policy or their military policy is aligned 100%. There's not much difference between those groups, and they have surpassed the sectarian barriers that were put in front of them by this Arab Spring.
And that would be the situation of Palestine and Gaza. That would be the way it. Do you think the behavior of the West somehow forced them all together, or the situation that the West created by this sort of behavior? What was I'm talking about the behavior itself or the outcome of what they've done to the region?
Yeah, look, Hezbollah has, before even this war in Gaza and the genocide in Gaza, for decades openly said that they are working towards the liberation of Palestine. And so this is an ideological position and a strategic goal, because Hezbollah, from its perspective of the safety of Lebanon and the peoples of Lebanon, understands that as long as the Zionist colony exists, there will be no safety for Lebanon or sovereignty for Lebanon or economic prosperity for Lebanon. And that's the same understanding that Ansarullah in Yemen have. So it was maybe possible for the Wahhabi and Ikhwani, Qatari, Emirati, Saudi media to try to confuse people, to say, well, Hezbollah is just using Palestine as an excuse to continue being militarized and so on in Lebanon and control the country. The war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, and the huge sacrifices that Hezbollah gave, including its martyred leaders and thousands of Lebanese peoples, and huge destruction of Lebanon, all for Palestine. Now it's clear. It's not an ideological issue. It's not a sectarian issue. It's not a issue of power. It's actually a principle. And the Palestinian people, all of them, know and understand that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who to this week is the commemoration of his assassination and martyrdom, gave his life to Palestine. And so there's no other leader of another country that was assassinated for their position on Palestine in this war, although we could probably count President Raisi of Iran, but we will wait for Iran to confirm that he was assassinated for it to say so.
As you've mentioned, tomorrow is the commemoration of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. And one of his prediction came true in terms of how he saw the situation in Syria and in the Middle East. By the way, here is what we've learned from General Petraeus, David Petraeus, talking to Al-Jolani. Here is what he said, and many people are arguing that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was talking about it even before happening. Here is what.
About you personally, how are you holding up under all this pressure? Are you getting time to do some thinking? Are you getting enough sleep at night? Again, I've been there, and it is so very, very hard. And your many fans, and I am one of them, we do have worries.
Yeah. It's what's your take? And because Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was talking about this situation, and you look at his speeches, all he said, you see that the same thing is happening. All he said is somehow is slowly, gradually, or rapidly is happening to the region.
Yeah. Look, let's presume the talk about democracy and human rights and women's rights against President Assad is true. Well, today there's no human rights, there's no democracy, there's no women's rights, whatever it is, in Syria. So why there's nobody talking about those rights? What's the difference between President Assad and Al-Jolani? The only thing is one kisses the hand of Israel and the United States and the other refused. That's the minimum of it. That's if we believe a propaganda that was told about the Syrian government, which is not true. Remember when they walked into Saydnaya prison, there was just a few, less than 100 prisoners in this prison. So today there's tens of thousands of Syrians that have disappeared and been killed or raped or thrown in mass graves. As we're speaking right now, the villages around Hama city, Christian and Shia and Alawi villages are being ethnically cleansed as we're speaking right now. So Petraeus asking him, how do you sleep? I thought he was going to ask him, how do you sleep with all this genocide at your hand, with the destruction of all of Syria? Nobody's asking where all the archaeological treasures of Syria are today. Nobody's asking where are the manuscripts of some of the oldest libraries still on earth in Damascus and Aleppo. Where did they go? It's clear Syria paid a huge price. 600,000 people at least killed to defend Palestine, to defend Lebanon, to defend Arab sovereignty and Arab honor. Pity Syria and the Syrian people having to live under the rule of Al-Jolani after withstanding it from 1942 till 2024. It's independent, sovereign, fighting every wave of colonialism. This is the country that fought the longest and suffered the most. And so I know in my mind that these Zionists and imperialists can laugh right now, can clap about the sleeping hours of Al-Jolani, their lover, but we will laugh last, because Syria is not a country that somebody like Al-Jolani can rule for long. The occupation of the French lasted exactly the the period between World War I and the end of World War II. That's it. It couldn't last longer. The minute there's a stoppage of war around us here, Syria will be liberated.
I think what has happened in Syria is somehow a warning sign for people in Lebanon, because here is what Tom Brock, the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, said about arming the government in Lebanon, fighting its own people.
Disarming Hezbollah.
It's the only people who are there. So Laith being mostly Sunnis, there are Shias, and it's a good organization. It's well-meaning, but it's not well-equipped. Because who are they going to fight? Right? We don't want to arm them. We're going to arm them so they can fight Israel? I don't think so. So you're arming them so they can fight their own people, the Hezbollah. I would say the Lebanese, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, because all they do is talk. There's never been one act. We've told them, do you want our help? We'll give you our help. We gave them a playbook. They can't get there. If we talk about trust, quite honestly, in this business, I don't trust any of them. Our interests are not aligned. Ally is a mistaken word. Our interests are not aligned.
With the Syrian regime?
No, with any of them. With any of them in the Middle East.
Yeah. He goes on, and he says about the same thing about Israel. But we know that he's not that much serious about Israel. Israel is running the show in the Middle East. But when it comes to Lebanon, Laith, when you look at the people in Lebanon and they're seeing what's going on in Syria, they're seeing what they're doing in Syria with Jolani and his gang in Syria, are they learning the lesson of Syria? Are they aware of what's going on in Syria, and how is that going to be translated in the internal policy of Lebanon?
Yeah, definitely. Everybody's watching what happened in Syria, and what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank. And Tom Barak speaking in such open ways has made the job of the resistance and anyone that wants to speak in support of the resistance much easier. That he made a big mistake, in my opinion. And he also, anyways, made a mistake by saying the Lebanese army is mainly Sunni. That's not true. Lebanese army reflects the percentages of the population, which means the largest bloc in the military is actually Shia. And that's part of it, why they cannot face their own people, and whether they're Sunni, Shia, or Christian, or Druze that are inside the army, they're not going to kill their own people. Nobody joined the military to do so. And he openly said that we will not arm this military to defend the country from its main enemy, Israel. We're only going to arm them to kill their own people, in those words. He also says in this same interview that there will be no peace, and they will not return the lands that they occupy in Lebanon, Syria, or Palestine. That the outcome of this is going to be one party has to submit. He used these words, and another has to dominate. So he's telling all the Arabs, not only the Lebanese, all the Muslims, that you have to submit to a chosen people. You have to admit that your own religion is a lie, that your prophets are liars. This is what acknowledging the right of the state of Israel to exist means. To an Arab, to a Christian, to a Muslim, it means that, well, your God is a liar, and you're putting your hand up and say, yes, there's a chosen people, they're them, I am not one of them, and my gods are false. This is what Barak is telling us openly. Has to happen. And this is why it's not going to happen. The lunacy of grandeur that is in the heads of the imperialists and the Zionists make them think that they can change the course of history and time and geography. It's been 6,000 years that the Europeans have been invading East Mediterranean and the south of the Mediterranean and trying to force the people to submit in these countries. Not only to submit physically, but to submit to their gods. You know, and every time they're failing. And he thinks, Mr. Barak, with Trump, I don't know, the guy is losing his mind, Trump, when you hear them. Or Netanyahu, the crazy. They think they can achieve what hasn't been achieved in 6,000 years. And that's the lunacy that's in their mind. And this is why they're going to burn down the whole world with them. And they will never achieve what they dream about.
Laith, here is what Naftali Bennett said about the movement in the West in terms of the recognition of the Palestinian state and his feeling about it.
You have the General Assembly resolution calling for a two-state solution. Are you not taking any of this as a sign that the rest of the world doesn't agree with you anymore?
Oh, no, I'm very cognizant of that. But in terms of our international position, look, it's tough. But I'd rather have my children live and be unpopular than have them killed and be beloved in the world.
Yeah. Laith, what's going on in the mind of Israelis and comparing that with the axis of resistance, people of Palestine? And we know that Israel, today as we talk, just before coming up, we've learned that a Yemeni drone has hit the Eilat, the southern of Israel. It shows that how it doesn't matter how much you help Israel, how much you send weapons, air defense systems, they're not going to be able to manage the situation in the Middle East because even the cost of what they're doing is not even comparable. And that's why they cannot sustain it. For the United States, the same way. That's why, in my opinion, Donald Trump has backed down. He feels the situation in the Red Sea. You remember, I said that Houthis capitulated. That's why we are getting back to the United States. We're not going to be there in the Red Sea in Bab el-Mandab. And how can they continue the conflict the way it is? Because it doesn't seem to me the Israeli economy is just somehow collapsing. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so the videos that we just saw of the Eilat, targeting by Yemeni drones, I think we saw at least 4 different targets being hit. So that shows you how, this new generation of drones that Yemen is using are, getting through all the air defenses. Their multi-warhead hypersonic missiles have been hitting their targets every day. And, we just had a few numbers come out from Foreign Affairs magazine. And those numbers showed that 75% of interceptions during the 12-day war between Iran and the Zionist colony, 75% of the interceptions were conducted by the THAAD and the SAM-3S American air defense systems that were stationed in the Zionist colony, meaning that Arrow and Davis Sling and Arrow 1, 2, 3, what have you, all of them failed in their job. The other number that we got is that the United States exhausted 27% of its stockpile of THAAD and SAM-3S missiles during those 12 days. That the Israelis had 2 more days of their own supply of air defense systems. This is why they begged for the war to stop with Iran, because by the 12th day already, the hits were almost at 80%, the possibility of an Iranian missile hitting its target. So we know that the Israeli economy is destroyed. The whole of Israel can only produce in a year 1,000 air defense missiles of the Arrow 1, 2, 3 and Davis Sling. while Iran can produce 1,000 hypersonic multi-warhead missiles in a month. Okay, so it's already done there. We also can see that the West is overextending itself, that the United States actually is the one that capitulated against Yemen. They were supposedly attacking Yemen to stop it from attacking Israel and the ships going to Israel. Well, they left, and Yemen is still attacking the Zionist colony and the shipping to it. So it was the United States that capitulated in front of Yemen. And now, you know, I know I have said this 2 years ago when this war started. Israel was defeated October 7th militarily. The West was defeated October 7th. What we have been seeing over the last 22, 23, almost 24 months now is a war about will. Will the Palestinians give up? Will the Lebanese give up? Will the Yemenis give up? Will the Iranians give up? Under mass destruction that has no strategic goals, military goals. Israel can bombard huge cities, destroy, kill, mass kill, but it cannot achieve any military goal. So the only way it can achieve military goal is by people capitulating to it. And up until now, the Palestinians haven't, the Lebanese haven't, the Yemenis haven't, the Iranians haven't. And the West is not going to be able to protect Israel for much longer. One last numbers I will throw at you here. We have now numbers from the Israeli Ministry of Defense that 81,000 Israeli soldiers have been injured. 81,000 Israeli soldiers. And according to modern, statistics of wars, it's 3 injured to 1 dead. So in the best case scenario, Israel had 27,000 dead soldiers. Okay, and this is more than half of what the United States lost during its Vietnam War, which was 55,000 injured, killed. So we're, Israel's military is falling apart. They're having to depend on the hilltop settlers from the West Bank to throw them in as cannon fodder in Gaza. The Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff needed to recruit 200,000 new soldiers. They couldn't. They put down the number to 100,000. They couldn't. They put it down to 50,000. They couldn't. And now, after a year of attempt, they've only got 18,000 new soldiers coming down from their original number that they wanted of 200,000. So Israel is falling apart. It cannot exist. It exists actually just on life support and in the angry minds of Western elite. That's where Israel exists. And as soon as that collapses, and we're beginning to see the collapse, there will be no Israel.
You know what's so amazing about, I don't know if you heard Mike Huckabee, the ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Israel. He said that Israel invented, I don't know, the cell phones. You look at his argument, saying that Israel invented oxygen that we are breathing. You know, it's so, how they're not capable of producing their arms if they're that much powerful in producing things that. And we know, but the other situation with the United States, Laith, as we know, the conflict in Ukraine is coming to an end because the West is not capable of producing more weapons to deliver that to Ukraine. Even with the latest news we had that Europeans are buying new weapons from the United States to send them to Ukraine, the United States has sold them weapons, but they don't have them. And I don't know when they're going to be able to deliver those weapons. That's the problem with Israel as well. It doesn't matter how long Israel wants to continue the conflict. They're not going to be able to fight against the acts of resistance, I think.
Yes, those air defense systems, that the West had to use to defend Israel against the hypersonic missiles, each one of them is $1 million to $20 million each missile, while the most expensive missile that Iran produces or Yemen produces is like $100,000. So it's the economy of this war is because of the democratization of military technology that we saw with drones and hypersonic missiles is now on the defender side. It doesn't matter how many F-16s you have and so on. Somebody can have a few missiles and can repel and have the same effect as having F-16s or F-35s. I want to say also that, obviously the Zionists have managed over 80 years to imprint on the mind of much of the Western society that they are the creme de la creme of humanity, that they are the best doctors, the best engineers, the best lawyers, the best singers, the best dancers, the best actors, everything that they're best. I remind me of, there was a skit on Saturday Night Live, maybe during the first Trump time, where it's about appointing somebody to the government, and all these senators asking about Israel, and then one of the senators asked him if Netanyahu picks up, this is all in a skit on Saturday Night Live, so Netanyahu picks up the phone and tells you that you need to save Israel tonight, and the only way you can do it is to give oral to a donkey on live television. Would you do it? And everybody, all the senators that are sitting say, yes, I'll do it. Okay, so this was a Saturday Night Live skit. But this is the reality right now. When you hear Mike Huckabee and Trump or other American officials telling their own populace that they are less than the Israelis, this is a unprecedented thing in human history. We've never heard any nation leadership tell their own people that they are less than somebody else before. We've heard, civilizations raise their whole population telling them that they're more than, they are supreme, but we've never heard somebody say that they are less. And us as Arabs, as Muslims in this area will refuse this. And I don't know how long the American public, the Canadian public, the British public will still accept to be told that they are less than Israelis.
Thank you so much, Laith, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Have a nice day, Nima.
Thank you. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Nima.
Hello,
how
Matt.
are you?
How's it going, Matt?
Good, good. How are you, man? It's good to see you.
Nice to see you back.
Hey, you need to take a break or anything?
No, we're on live right now.
Oh, we're on live. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my phone. I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
How's
Seamless
it going,
with the
Matt?
transition. I'm
Long
doing
time.
well. I'm doing well. Yeah, yeah. How are you and your family? It's been
Yeah.
6 months.
We're doing
I guess.
great. We're doing
Yeah.
great. Yeah. It's so nice to have you back, Matt.
Thank you.
Matt, let's start with the situation of the Palestinian state. We know that right now in Europe, Canada, Australia, the people are talking about the two-state solution. And what is somehow, in my opinion, is unrealistic is the way that they're talking about Palestinian state without Hamas. And how can you define that? How can you understand this sort of position on their part?
Well, I think you could take the very specific, literal, semantic explanation that Hamas, as we understand it now, the organized resistance movement that's been active for 40 some odd years, right, cannot exist. That those folks who are walking around with that flag cannot assemble under that flag any longer, which is something that Hamas itself has said it's willing to do. I mean, over and over, Hamas has said a resolution with regards to Israel and Palestine, Hamas would step out of governance. They have said this multiple times. They are advocating in their ceasefire proposals for Palestinian a Palestinian government to be stood up that doesn't necessarily include Hamas. Now that's again that literal, specific, semantic idea of these guys with that flag can't be involved. If you take it though, if you step away from that and look at this in a much more rational, reasonable, mature manner, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Are you saying that you are fine as long as that, again, as I say, the flag of Hamas is not present? Well, what are you doing to then address the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people that have been expressed through Hamas, through Palestinian Islamic Jihad, through the PLO, through the 16 or 17 other resistance groups that operate in Gaza and in the West Bank? What are you saying? That are you saying they cannot take part? So I'm very suspect of those who say it has to be without Hamas, because what I think they're saying is the latter, that it has to be a Palestine that does not resist. It has to be a tamed, neutered eunuch of a state. That's what Palestine must look like. It must resemble the Palestine that Hillary Clinton talks about very often. You hear Hillary and Bill Clinton as well, but you hear them speak often about how the Palestinians rejected a peace deal with Israel. And that's what it would have been. The Palestinian state that would have come out of what they're talking about would have been a weak, pathetic, neutered shell, a hologram of a nation. They wouldn't have even had their own water rights, let alone border control, airport, ports, a military, trade rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very suspect of those who say you have to have a Palestinian state without Hamas, because what I think they mean is a Palestinian state that exists on its knees in supplication to Israel, to the United States, and to the West.
Matt, we had Tom Brock in his latest interview. We talk about the end game in.
I'm laughing just because that guy's.
Let me just play what he said in this interview about the end game.
Sure.
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that, because I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. Look, the end game, when we say peace, it's an illusion. There's never been peace. There will probably never be peace, because everybody's fighting for legitimacy. The end result is somebody wants dominance, which means somebody has to submit. In that part of the world, submit, there's no Arabic word for submit. They can't wrap their head around submit. So eventually, prosperity is the only answer.
I don't think peace is illusion, Matt. I don't see the way that, because the way that this guy sees what's going on, there is no end to what he's talking about. That's hugely, it scared everyone, because what is he talking about? After all, we have to understand the situation. We have to have some sort of solution for what's going on.
Yeah, this is scary. These people are ignoramuses. They are, I heard the other day said this about Donald Trump, and we should talk about Trump's speech yesterday at the General Assembly, because certainly there's a lot we can mock and make fun of, but it's very dangerous, very scary when you look at what he means, what he intends, his world vision. And that's the same as Tom Barak there in Lebanon. It's great to have a guy like Barak or even Trump, because there's an entertainment value to it. Your previous guest Laith was talking about Saturday Night Live. And it's like watching a Saturday Night Live skit. The Donald Trump presidency would be fantastic if it was a Netflix television comedy show, but it's not. And you look at people like Barack and you say, first of all, he's an ignoramus. He doesn't know what he's talking about. When he says there's no Arabic word to submit, Islam means to submit. Like the whole religion is based around one's individual submittance
Yeah.
to to God. I mean, that's what the word means. That's the when Muhammad was called in the cave, and I don't want to go too far on this because I've forgotten so much about these types of things. But anyway, he was called to submit, right? I mean, so the ignorance that's on display here, that they so willingly put out there and don't care. You can imagine that somebody has to have been, I don't know if Barack is on Twitter or not, or on X, but it has to have been corrected by now. Like, you made a mistake. They don't care. Watching Trump yesterday talk about there's a real key part. His speech was so much about migration as well as about climate change and renewable energy. You could totally see ExxonMobil winding him up beforehand. But when he talks about China, he says how China is making all the wind turbines and solar panels, but they don't use them themselves. They sell them to the suckers in the West who've bought into the green energy scam. And they pans to the Chinese delegation. And the Chinese delegation is just like, you can see on their faces, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Because China is by far the biggest user of renewable energy in the world, and they keep investing more and more. Their share of the utilization of renewables grows every year. But Trump doesn't care about the facts. Barack doesn't care about the facts. And so when they speak like this, it is illuminating, and it shows that they have a worldview and a mindset that is, to your point, Nima, endless conflict, endless war. They see themselves, they are, there's a primacy in their individualism and in their terms of what they're tied into that dominates their thinking in a world where everything is us versus them. And so when people hear a guy like Tom Barack say how there'll never be peace, how it's always about, and he lays it out there. It's always about someone trying to dominate and someone not willing to submit. And he lays out these dynamics of an aggressor, someone who's trying to take from another, and he lays it out there, clear as day. What's happening here? Absolutely, that's what's happening. You're having, just as the United States is trying to achieve, maintain primacy in the world, you have Israel trying to maintain primacy in the Middle East. It's clear as day. And Barack, but they agree with that because that's their worldview. And so these people are very, very dangerous because they're not people who operate off of principles or values. They're ahistoric in many ways. They're ignorant, as we were discussing. And so that people who haven't watched that interview, or even if you want, Middle East Eye did a terrific summary of what Barack said in that interview, 10 key points, as what Middle East Eye described as a wild or a crazy interview with Tom Barack. So, yeah, I mean, certainly, you see how these guys, what they say, they're very clear, and overt, and we should take them at their word.
Matt, sorry, I said Matt. When we look at Europe today, we see, in my opinion, what's going on with the leaders in Europe is they're somehow trying to get closer to the public opinion in Europe. That's why they have decided to recognize the state of Palestine. You see that in Italy, the people are out on the street protesting the foreign policy of the government toward Palestine. We had the same thing with Charlie Kirk in the United States. The public, the crowd that they were discussing the case of Israel, they have somehow they could change Charlie's view on Israel. And the movement coming from the public opinion, the movement coming from the people, and to the people who have some sort of power, who are in the position, who are responsible for the foreign policy. Mainly, I'm talking about Europe. So, do you think that the public opinion would be able to move it forward more than what is happening right now? Because that would be hugely game changer, in my opinion.
Well, certainly, if the Europeans were to cut trade with Israel, right? That would be massive. I don't think we're going to see that, though. My view on this recognition is that it's performative, it's symbolic, but ultimately, look, I've got right hanging out in front of my house, I've got the Palestinian flag flying right now. What does it actually do? What does it actually mean? I think this is more of a gesture by the Europeans for the points you made, Nima, that they have to do something to placate their public. Look, I mean, the popularity of these leaders throughout Western Europe is, they make, my God, it makes the Democrats and the Republicans in the U.S. look like they're the Beatles or something like that. I mean, the gesture that's done, but if it's not backed up by action, it's ultimately meaningless. I was in Ireland 10 months ago, and when I spoke, the biggest pushback I got, the angriest the Irish would get at what I said was when I'd say something like, and I really want to thank you because Ireland is really leading the way here. They're one of the few nations that's speaking out, one of the few Western nations that's attempting to do something about this genocide. And the Irish will get upset, with us. And right. So in the response would be, we're the biggest trading partner of Israel. What I mean? So the Irish government can say what it wants, but it's the biggest trading partner with Israel in the EU. I mean, so until there's actually some action, actually something that's done that hurts Israel in a way that forces the Israeli government to be under the severe political pressure from those Israelis who are not tied into the Israeli project, which is a smaller and smaller number every year. What type of pressure, what type of force do you have to exert on Israel right now to make it that the 80% of Israelis who are fine and happy with the genocide going on, or whatever the latest public opinion numbers are, the entirety of the Knesset, all of the cabinet, any of Netanyahu's challengers, what would you have to do to get them to say, okay, this hurts so much that we're going to stop the continuation of our 8-decade-long ethnic cleansing plan, particularly when we have the end in sight in Gaza. It might take a few more years. And as we are on the cusp of achieving where we really messed up 80 years ago, or even 80 years ago, was not going all the way to the Jordan River. They are on the cusp of annexing the West Bank. And this is their goal. This has been their objective. Everything else is ancillary. Everything else is an adjacent or secondary effort. It's a shaping operation, what we're seeing happen in Syria, Lebanon, even Iran. It's all meant to prepare the battlefield, if you will, the region, if you will, for the annexation of the West Bank. So the pressure that has to be put then on the European states to do something so severe that it's going to push the Israelis, knowing they have the backing of the Americans we don't see any end to that. I mean, that's the least thing I can predict. So, this recognition certainly needed, should have been done decades ago. Al Jazeera had a great headline, 108 years after the Balfour Declaration, the British recognized the state of Palestine. I thought that was a perfect headline, but ultimately that's all it really is, just a headline. The recognition is needed, necessary, but I don't think it puts any real pressure. And in many ways, it gives the Israelis what they want. Certainly, it gives the Israelis the reason to move forward on the annexation, right? And we'll see what the Israeli response will be. I think a couple of days ago, Netanyahu said he'll discuss this with Trump. So when he's seeing Trump, I guess he's seeing Trump at the end of this week. Maybe we'll know what the Israelis plan to fully do. But the annexation has long been their goal, and that's why I'll say, those who are concerned with Palestine, the time is now to work on building Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. They've been resisting for decades. I don't want to overstep here, make it sound, but in terms of Gaza is gone. I don't see anything that's going to stop the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. God help me. God help those people. But Gaza is gone. West Bank still exists. And is there a possibility for those of us outside to do whatever needs to be done to firm up, to strengthen, to support, to fund whatever the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, so that what happened in Gaza doesn't happen in the West Bank?
Matt, we've learned from Politico that Donald Trump promised to the Arab states that he's not going to support Israel annexing the West Bank. And do you think that any of these Arab leaders would trust Donald Trump in what he's
I don't know. Yeah, I know. I don't think it's. I don't think so. I don't think so. And the idea being is the Arab leaders. How many of us trust the Arab leaders? Right. So if I were to say to you, the Arab leaders will kick up a storm and get all upset. And when I say Arab leaders, I include Erdogan and others. So the leaders of the region. They all made their speeches again yesterday. Erdogan, Abdullah, they made their speeches the same as they made their speeches last year. I remember last year at the UN, both Erdogan and Abdullah were essentially declaring war on Israel. Abdullah talked about physically opening up a corridor into Gaza, implying military force. Erdogan, same type of thing. And so do we expect anything? Why should we? Why is it that the Israelis and the Americans don't believe? Why should they not believe that in 4 or 5 years from now, after Erdogan and Abdullah and whoever else jumps up and down about the annexation of the West Bank, who they're not going to continue with relations? The UAE and others may pull out of the Abraham Accords, but what's to stop them from 5 years from now normalizing relations again once? And I think that's the Israeli mindset on this. That's the American mindset. Yeah, it'll be difficult internationally. It has been difficult internationally. But look, we've survived 2 years of this genocide, and what's really occurred? They still maintain relations with us. So what if they stop relations with us? Okay, but in a few years' time, things will go back to normal. I think that's what the bet is by the Israelis and the Americans. Not that they care too much, because the idea of Fortress Israel, didn't Netanyahu compare Israel to Sparta not too long ago? But this idea of Fortress Israel, Israel against the world, well, isn't that the biblical way? Isn't that the cosmic or universal history of all this? Isn't that kind of the underlying mindset of the Israelis, and then by extension, the Zionists in the U.S. and in Europe that support them? I mean, look at Trump's speech yesterday. It was all us versus them. Trump's speech yesterday he was talking to the Europeans. When he said your countries are going to hell, he wasn't talking to folks in Brazil, right, or folks in Morocco, or folks in Indonesia. He was talking to the Europeans, in particular the Western Europeans. And this idea that there's an us versus them mindset, that there are blocks in this world, that there are races or ethnicities in this world, that this is the clash of civilizations. These is what these people believe. It's what they ascribe to, and it's what they are preparing for, what they're attempting to build. I really do believe that. And so if that's the case, then isn't that just the way it's supposed to be, Fortress Israel? So if all these nations, drop relations with Israel or stop trade or whatever, well, isn't that what was to be expected? Isn't that what the Bible tells us? Isn't that what our history tells us? Isn't that what our guts tell us? Isn't that the consequence, the cost, the risk of pursuing our rightful place in this world, in this order, in history, right? I mean, that's how I see these people as. So yeah, I mean, would they prefer to continue those relations, to continue that trade? Absolutely. But their goal is the West Bank. Their goal is greater Israel, whether it be the Israelis or the Americans. That's the goal. And whatever the costs are, well, then that's what they have to bear. And again, I think their assumption is I don't have any reason to doubt it, that in however many years' time, things will go back to usual. Business will go back to being business. The tourists will come back to Jerusalem, so on and so forth.
Matt, in your opinion, how big was the attack on Doha for the Arab states? And because we know that Israelis are talking about that 15 fighter jets went to Qatar to bomb the negotiations room, and they flew over Saudi Arabia to get there. They used Saudi Arabia airspace, and how Saudi Arabia was not able to recognize to see what's going on in its airspace. Did they know about it, or they're not that much capable to understand to just somehow to see what's going on
Yeah,
upon?
I don't. You know, it's to your question about how they should be reacting. They should be very concerned about this. It's very serious. It demonstrates a capability and capacity of the Israelis that is simply unmatched. It's certainly the defense agreement, the military treaty between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan that was announced this week, coming right after that attack on Doha. That certainly an agreement like that would take months, if not years, to put something together like that. But the timing was perfect, right? The Saudis demonstrating that we have to look elsewhere for our security needs. That the old established role of the United States that goes back to Franklin Roosevelt as the guarantor of security for Saudi Arabia is gone. My understanding what happened with that strike on Doha was that the Israelis launched their aircraft. They fired their air-launched ballistic missiles from the Red Sea, and that they overflew Saudi Arabia. Those air-launched ballistic missiles travel very fast. They go very high. I don't know if the Saudis have the capability to see those missiles. The Americans do, but you have to be on alert and looking for them. And there's no indication that the Americans would have been on alert or looking for them at that level, and at that time. Again, they travel very fast. I don't know who's telling the truth in terms of whether the Israelis gave the Americans heads up or not. I don't know. If they're pointing fingers at each other. But even so, the way that those ballistic missiles work, they're, again, the altitude they climb to, go up into space essentially, and then how fast they travel. I don't know if the American defenses in Qatar could have been able to be turned on and taken out those ballistic missiles. And as well, these are very new ballistic missiles. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what they're called. But if folks remember, when things got heated with Iran and Israel in the spring of 2024, leaked documents came out of the American intelligence community showing the Israeli preparations for those strikes. And they included two of these types of air-launched ballistic missiles that most observers had never heard of. I mean, I had never heard of these things. And when I Googled it, there was nothing out there on what these missiles were. And you can find maybe a blog or two with some speculation. So these are the most advanced Israeli attack missiles, right? So I don't know if they're as capable as, say, the Russian Oreshnik, hypersonic missiles. But you have to believe that they are. It's a capability, and a capacity that the Israelis have that no one else in the region can match. So to get to your point then about how serious they should be taking this, absolutely. You can't depend upon the United States. The Israelis have weapons that you can't. So what are you going to do? And I think seeing that treaty, by Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, shows one of the way forwards. Now, I know the Gulf Cooperation Council, they all met and they said they're going to improve their air defenses and they're going to work. We'll see. But certainly it is a very clear display of two things. One, the growing Israeli primacy in the region, which again is a subset of the American global primacy, but then also two, this shifting multipolar world, as we like to call it, that is establishing itself into blocks, or at least getting in position to create those blocks. Very similar to Orwell, 1984, the world's divided into three powers, and they fight each other, and they're allied with each other, and they change overnight. It's not going to look like that, but it's certainly is more similar to that than most anything else you can point to as terms of the literature that was going to predict the future. So, this is very serious, and we'll see what the Arab states, the Gulf states, the region does. And that includes reaching out to others, and that includes potentially this is a big step, it'd be a huge one, but it's their relationship with Iran.
Yeah. I think, Matt, what we learned with the conflict, 12 days of war between Iran and Israel, that Israel has its limitations in using the weapons that they have. Because the fighter jets, as I talk with Ted Postal, he said these fighter jets are so easy for air defense systems to hit them, to target them, and to destroy them. But when it comes to the missiles, the case is different. Yeah, it's complicated, as you've mentioned. But we know that, Matt, Israel cannot sustain the conflict the way it is right now. It's too difficult for Israel. But you don't see that in their behavior. You don't see, even people in the United States, they're talking about the limitations of Israeli government. But you look at Israel, the administration, Netanyahu administration, or the position, those people who are not agreeing on each and everything with the administration in Israel, they don't seem to care about what's going on and how long they're going to be capable to continue the conflict the way it is. Because the case of Ukraine is collapsing, and you know what's going on there.
Yeah.
And how about Israel? Do they really think? Do they know what really would be if they want to continue the conflict? What is the capability of the country, and how long they're going to be able to continue it?
I think, you have to assume, as irrational as they seem, that at some points they are rational actors, that behind closed doors, they have to have these conversations. Certainly the idea of getting the United States involved with Iran there are multiple reasons for it. But one of those reasons has to be that, as you're saying, the Israelis were starting to run low on air defense missiles, and the Americans were starting to run low on air defense missiles. I think you're too generous to the Americans because we still have plenty who, after witnessing the United States defeat by the Houthis in the Red Sea, as well as the fact that we're running out of missiles, after 12 days with Iran, in debating the effectiveness of those missiles, let alone the effectiveness of the B-2 strikes and everything else. There are plenty of people here who still think we can fight China. Even though every day as the United States gets weaker and China gets stronger, we have lots of folks in the United States who have not picked up on, we couldn't beat the Houthis in the Red Sea or the Iranians over 12 days, and we're going to fight the Chinese. So there is an irrationality that dominates these mindsets, but that's always the way it's been. Certainly you look at various historical episodes, wars, in hindsight, you say, why the heck did they do that? Why did Germany decide to fight on two fronts, not once, but twice? Like, didn't they learn it, right? So you have a desire for our understanding of these people to be rational actors when they're not rational actors. I remember the first economics class I ever took. First thing the professor said is, economics is a science that requires rational actors for it to work. And then he said something like, how many people do you know that are rational? So this idea that we're expecting, so you can have both things at once. They can say to each other, like, shoot, we're running out of missiles here. We don't have the capacity to keep up with this, so on and so forth. As well as the understanding that your defenses are always going to lag behind your offense, right? And nobody better to explain that than Ted Postal. But the idea that it's a lot easier to build a new generation of offensive missiles that can go faster, climb higher, zigzag more, and avoid enemy air defenses than it is to build enemy air defenses that can hit those new missiles. You're always playing catch up on the defense. It's also always more expensive. So you have this reality then for the Israelis and for the Americans that if we want to do something like that, we have to go for real strong knockout punches. And we saw the Israelis attempt that, right? I mean, they attempted a decapitation campaign
Yeah.
against the Iranians. They were successful in many ways, but it didn't bring about the results that they were looking for. They were, I think, hoping by killing off the top tier of Iranian military leadership that somehow the Iranian military would become useless, that they'd be just collapse and not have any form or control to it. Didn't happen. The Iranians were prepared to have their guys killed off like that. New commanders stepped in. I mean, that's a pretty basic, military 101. I mean, that your boss is going to get killed and you're going to have to do his job. So, there's their arrogance and their hubris in a lot of ways, built upon previous successes. It's not tempered the way it should be. So you have this danger that the Israelis will try again. Now, does anyone think that the Israelis won't use a nuclear weapon? I mean, they've done everything else. Why wouldn't they use a nuclear weapon? After witnessing the 2 years of genocide, my God, of course they use a nuclear weapon if they felt they needed to. They have no problem pissing off the Americans. They have no problem, right, upsetting their lifeline. So Donald Trump says, yeah, no, the Israelis are never going to do that again, in reference to the Doha attacks. And the next day, Netanyahu is like, oh, no, we're going to do it again. I mean, they have no issue with that. So their arrogance, their hubris, their entitlement. But again, this goes back to who these people are, right? Their righteousness comes from their biblical, cosmic, historical understanding of the world they live in. And that's what justifies, that's their foundation. And if it's us against the world, then so be it. Isn't that the way God wants it? So, but you've seen indications the Israelis do understand it, again, because both things can be true, in the sense that, Netanyahu just in the past week saying that we're going to build out our own military industrial capacity here. We're not going to be reliant upon others. And that certainly is a way to go forward. If he was serious about being Sparta, then sure, why not? In 2024, Israeli military sales increased by like 15%. So if you're going to have a brain drain out of Israel, one of the consequences of Israel becoming Fortress Israel, us against, with a lifeline coming in for the United States. So the way the Israeli state stays afloat is by selling bonds that American cities and counties and states purchase, then that's the way they'll do it. And if you're going to lose by the brain drain, if you're going to lose your top smart people, the secular folks, not the settler lunatics with their 12 children in the hills, but the folks with 1 or 2 kids in Tel Aviv who work for the tech companies, if they're going to go live with their cousins in LA or Toronto or whatever, well, so be it. Those companies are still going to remain headquartered in Israel. And as well, we're not really losing anything demographically because the settlers in the hills are pumping out 8, 10, 12 kids each. So I think they feel they can sustain it. And then on top of that, if we build out the same thing Zelensky was saying or has said, if Israel becomes this fortress with its arsenal, and as we said, in the midst of the genocide, they're increasing their military sales. Well, maybe that becomes a significant part of their economy. It's already, their arms industry is very impressive for a country its size. So if they can automate it, if they can have robots making bombs, and then these bombs are battle tested, who's not going to buy them? Colombia, Brazil might not, but most other countries are going to buy them. So you could see in the madness a path forward that they can believe in. And it makes me understand this as, we'll be talking about this for years to come, that there is no hope, that we should not have hope. We should only have action on our side, because that's the only thing that will matter, that will make a difference. Things aren't going to get better because nothing is going to change with regards to the Israelis and Americans, and they don't care about the rest of the world. Again, Donald Trump yesterday was making his pitch to the Europeans to be on his side. This shift away from Russia by Trump, right? In the last couple of days, with the things we've heard him say about the Ukraine war, about Russia, everything else, I believe that is an understanding that he can get what he wants from Russia from others. Venezuela being the big one, right? He doesn't need the commodities, the oil, the gas, all the minerals coming out of Russia if he feels he can then get them from South America, right? So that's this type of alignment of who's on our side, who's in our block versus them. And, certainly there are plenty of people in DC who think they can still peel Russia away from China and all those things. But, if you look at Donald Trump yesterday speaking at the UN, who were the three people sitting there watching him? It was Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary. It was Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor. And it was Michael
everybody.
Waltz, right? It was Michael Waltz, the UN. I mean, and what are those three guys' views on Russia? They hate the Russians. Right. And so this is something I think many of us expected, that Trump would try to do something with Russia and then it wouldn't go his way. And all the people who are around him, anti-Russia, we're going to say, Mr. President, is a good effort. But, we told you, you can't talk to these guys. You can't work with them. These guys are etc. Keith General Kellogg's in the background yelling about how we're going to kick their ass or something. Right. I mean, and so, yeah, Trump goes along with it. And the worldview he has, okay, I don't need Russia, maybe the way he thought he did in his first administration.
I think, Matt, when history would talk about these moments that we're living, they're going to judge us based on our decisions and what we are doing. And I think in the last 2 days, we had a bombshell coming from Russia on Trump that Russia says that they want to continue to comply with the quantitative restrictions under the New START treaty. This is huge.
Right.
After having all of these conflicts, sending weapons, fighting the United States in Ukraine and the Europeans in Ukraine, and all of this, they're trying to put out something to work on, to be more involved with the West. And they're waiting for the United States to respond.
Right.
These are huge things that because history would talk about these things. History would talk about that China wants to negotiate, wants to talk with the United States. Iran tries to do everything that we want to talk, we want to negotiate. When it comes to the New START treaty, we know how important is that. And do you think, what would be, in your opinion, what would be the response of the United States to Russia?
I think they're going to ignore it. I think the Americans are going to ignore it. I hope to God they don't. I hope Trump bucks the pressure he's going to have to ignore it and goes ahead and says, yeah, deal, we'll extend it. I hope that's the case. I don't know, Nima, it's something I need to go look up, I guess, whether or not an extension like that requires congressional approval. I don't know. If that's the case, he's not going to get it. There's just, for one thing, so much money is about to be made off of New START expiring in the U.S. This is going to be a bonanza for the nuclear weapons industry. The gloves are going to be off. Congress has already approved. So about, I don't know the exact numbers, but about half our B-52 fleet, in order to comply with New START, can't carry nuclear weapons, right? Can't carry, and we're bringing in a new nuclear air launched cruise missile as well. So about half our B-52s aren't configured to carry nuclear weapons. Congress a couple of years ago passed a law right? I mean, this is a law that as soon as New START expires, the other B-52s, those B-52s that are non-nuclear weapon capable, will be upgraded immediately to carry nuclear weapons. I mean, so that's just one example of many we could talk about with how this will be a gold mine for the weapons industry, and how dangerous that will be, and how the Chinese and the Russians and others will have to respond, right? I mean, if you're the Indians, say, with everything going on, with all they've seen, with the 50% tariffs and this war with Pakistan and on and on and on, everything else, and you can kind of feel that, what we had in the past with the Americans, where we had some type of working relationship, even in the days when the Indians were flying Soviet fighter planes and stuff like that, there was this, they were part of the non-aligned movement and everything else, if I recall correctly, but there was a working relationship with the Americans. Well, is that going to go away? And now do the Indians then have to worry about being hit by an American attack? So, I mean, the idea that you're just talking about three powers, and then as well too, is say that you have a schism really occur between Europe and the U.S. Well, will the French and the British upgrade their fleets to keep pace with the other powers? Right? I mean, so you can really see this opening up. I mean, the current arms race that's been going underway originates with George W. Bush's abrogation of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2001. That's the thing that opens up this current arms race, just as everyone predicted it would. So would the failure or the end of New START double down on that? And I think it would. And so I just don't see the Americans extending it, based upon their messages, based upon the politics of it all, based upon the money involved, and based upon their continued worldview of the need for the U.S. to maintain primacy. And as the world shifts and it becomes into more of these blocks and everything, and more of a us versus them, and that primacy is endangered, we can't afford to, maintain this treaty, particularly when the arguments against the treaty are so specious. Well, it doesn't include the Chinese, and the Chinese are aligned with the Russians. So that means the Russians don't have 1,500 missiles at the ready and warheads at the ready. They really have 2,500. So we have to, right? I mean, you could see how that specious argument is going to be made on CNN, on Fox News, in congressional committee hearings, and of course, all the money behind it. So I hope to God I'm wrong. I hope to God I'm wrong. I hope to God Trump is going to say, hey, when I said back in January or February or whatever that we need to get rid of nuclear weapons, I really meant it. Maybe someone can convince him that, hey, Mr. President, you want that Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe this is the way to go for it. Not just, but I don't see that because I just don't look. I mean, with I think a lot of us, Nima, we were hopeful that the talks between Russia and the U.S. were going to be above and beyond Ukraine, that it was going to be involving much larger and broader strategic questions. The American missile bases in Romania and Poland, for example. We're not even close. Not even close. So, another reason why I'm doubtful that the Americans will accept the Russians' proposal here and extend it for a year. It'd be simple. It'd be easy. It wouldn't change anything. But I just don't see that.
What's so tragic, Matt, when we see the United States, we see a elites or blob, a fraction of 1% of the United States. They're deciding about everything, but they don't understand that China has changed the game. The game is not just about dominance. It's about partnership. It's about being equal partners. And of course, in the way that Russia has some sort of that has a partnership, substantial partnership with China, and they're benefiting from this partnership. Both parties are benefiting from that. Iran has the same way. You look at India, as you've mentioned, India is getting closer to China and Russia, to BRICS. They don't follow. They don't want to dominate. They don't want this primacy, as you mentioned. China doesn't want it. You don't see that in their behavior. That's game changer. And the United States needs to change its behavior because those countries they tried so hard to convince India. Even Lotnik said, get out of BRICS if you want a better relationship. How stupid is that to ask India to do?
Well, I'm sure, with the Chinese, I'm sure if you're working in a mine in Africa, whether it's owned by the Chinese or the Americans, it's awful, horrible. So, I mean, for most of the people in the global South, whoever the ultimate owners of the industry are, I don't think it probably really matters. But in terms of the larger geopolitical perspective, you're absolutely right. You don't have this desire for primacy advanced through the policies of these nations. At least we can see. We're not seeing them. Theirs is not just another rehashing of the colonial methods of the last several hundred years, right? What they are trying to do is they are trying to create circumstances or conditions throughout the world where they prosper. Absolutely. Whoever it is, the Chinese, the Indians, whoever it is, they want to come out winners, right? They want to make money. They want to do well. They want to grow assets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They don't want to do that, though, through the barrel of a rifle, or in the modern area, the Hellfire missile from a drone. You know, right? I mean, and this is what you heard coming out of all parts of the world. I can't remember who it was, but someone from Africa, a minister from a country in Africa, said, you know, when we deal with the Americans, we end up getting commandos and drones. When we deal with the Chinese, we end up getting ports and railroads. You know, I mean, so now are those port and railroad deals sweetheart deals that are just being done for altruistic reasons by the Chinese? No, of course not. Are there legitimate concerns about the way China is putting nations in debt? Of course. However, if you look at the conditions of debt these countries are currently in from the West, why not go with the Chinese? You know what I mean? So I think, to your point, though, is that these countries are approaching their role in the world, their order, their position in the world, in a way, of course, certainly of self-interest, but in a way that has a mutual there's mutual benefit, because they understand that that's the way you grow, that's the way you prosper, that's the way you get stronger. It's not by wasting your resources on wars, having to keep inefficient, corrupt dictators in power in order to make sure that that country, you know, is your color on the map, right? So this idea of like the whole chessboard strategy, they just don't see it that way because it doesn't make sense. They're smart enough to know that's not how we are going to prosper. That's not how we are going to get stronger. That's not how, yeah, the Chinese, of course, want to be the most powerful nation in the world. They don't want to do it the way the Americans did it, though, because they look at that and they realize how idiotic it has been. Why would they? I mean, I had a friend who was in China 15 years ago, and he spoke to Chinese foreign ministry people. And he said, what's your goal for the Americans? And he said, we want to see the Americans continue to be bogged down in never-ending wars in the Middle East for as long as we live, right? I mean, because they just knew that as the United States declined, because of all these burdens, all these weights, stones tied around America's neck, and as well as the American perspective that strength comes from winning battles overseas, which is nonsense. We haven't won a war in 80 years. And we did that with others, not by ourselves, right? That strength comes from what's internal to your country. It's people, it's resources, it's infrastructure, it's education. They understand that. So, yeah, no, it's maddening as an American watching this, because it's so easy to see. And there are there are so many other alternatives and options. But, you know, I guess this is what we have to endure for the, you know, as a consequence of being born in a declining empire.
Actually, nobody wants to. Matt, I'm sure that those people in Iran, in Russia, in India, they want some sort of balance between the East and the West. Everyone wants that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those people in the United States, their game is zero-sum game.
That's exactly right.
This is hugely destructive to the United States and to the world, in my opinion.
Right, and that zero-sum mentality is the definitive viewpoint of Americans in Washington, D.C. and in New York. You know, so whether it's in the foreign policy establishment, military intelligence circles, the political circles, the banking industry, the media, you know, I mean, you watch CNN or MSNBC or read the Times or the Journal, it comes across as zero sum. That if America gets this, then some, right, in the reverse. So it's, you know, and if in the United States you express something other than that, if you were to say, my God, if you're in DC and stand up in the middle of a conference at a think tank, Zygmunt Brzezinski's grand chessboard is garbage, they chase you out with pitchforks and torches. they chase you across the Memorial Bridge. I mean, like, so it's become ensconced in terms of who we are as a people. So it's just not even a sense of we do this out of interest, right? That this is just naked, blind greed. We want, no one else can have because it's better. This is because this is who we are. We doesn't, and so it's even a sense of like, if we have to expend more, if we have to waste more, if we have to spend $8 trillion on Iraq and Afghan war, then so be it. That's what we do. And this is what's very dangerous for other countries. They have to understand it. So the Russians, I think, have to be concerned here. Now, Donald Trump didn't say anything about the Americans getting involved against Russia. And as far as we can understand, the policy is just going to be maybe one of the Americans walking away from talks and then selling weapons to the Europeans. But this is what I would have said to Putin 3.5 years ago, President, that you have to be very careful with the Americans, because if I was Joe Biden, I could say to you, if Biden was willing to talk to him, look, we just spent $8 trillion on Iraq and Afghanistan. You don't think we can do it again? You don't think we can run? I mean, we'll do it. We've done it before. We were happy to do it again, kind of thing. Our own stupidity, our own vainglory will destroy.
Donald Trump wants to get back to Afghanistan.
Exactly. That's right. I mean, that's exactly right. So it's very real. And even too, we look again back to Trump's speech to the General Assembly. He was talking to the Europeans. That he's crass and he's bombastic and he's rude and he's idiotic. He's what I heard described as a dumb ideas, a dumb person's idea of a smart person. Like that type of. We can make those jokes and mock him and everything, but you know what? What he was saying, talking to the Europeans, again, crass and crude and everything, it dovetails with what the Democrats believe, that there needs to be this kinship between the U.S. and the Americans. If anyone thinks that Biden and his people didn't view that relationship of the U.S. And the Europeans as being vassals of the United States, I don't know what to tell you. So you see there's a continuity here. Even as gross as what Trump said yesterday was, there's a continuity there with his Democratic, predecessor, as well as with the Obama administration and everything else. So yeah, there's a lot to be concerned. I mean, it's we can again mock it, make fun of it, but it's very serious, very serious.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Matt, for being with us today. Great pleasure to have you on again. And
all right,
we're
thank you.
Have it on Wednesdays.
Wednesday at 2:00. Absolutely. Happy to be here.